There are those who believe that life here began out there, far across the universe, with tribes of humans who may have been the forefathers of the Egyptians, or the Toltecs, or the Mayans, that they may have been the architects of the Great Pyramids, or the lost civilizations of Lemuria, or Atlantis. Some believe that there may yet be brothers of man who even now fight to survive, far, far away amongst the stars.
Delegates, I realize you're all anxious to get back to your ships before our rendezvous with the Cylons, but I think it appropriate to toast the most significant event in the history of mankind. I would like to raise my chalice to you, not merely as the quorum of 12, representing the 12 colonies of man, but as my friends, the greatest leaders ever assembled. As we approach the 7th millennium of time, the human race at last will find peace. Thanks to you. Peace.
It was the 7th era of mankind. 20 yards had passed since the last Great War. A civilization was reborn. An enemy had grown. And now a new generation will have to face an old foe.
It is done, imperious leader.
I must prepare them for the second coming.
It's been 5 years since my guys saw that Cylon. They no longer pose a threat.
They have evolved.
Greetings. There's been a Cylon civil war. A new and more lethal species of Cylons has emerged. Let me say that you're all in great peril, and only I can lead you to safety.
My brother is leading his dad in dangerous path.
Your son's gonna make a fine pilot.
Yes, he is. These cadets have no idea what they're in for.
Your father has gone beyond.
How dare you?
You care for no one but yourself and your quest for power. Now mark my words. I will not stand by and watch the human race bow down and be defeated once again.
We have no right where we want them. Your friend Starbuck, he was alive when last I saw him. I'm sure he's dead by now.
Starbuck's alive, I know it.
If you leave, I will replace you.
Prepare the fleet for battle.
They were in the midst of a life and death struggle for survival. We need heroes.
The time has come to stop running and take back our sacred homeland. Are you ready to lay down your lives so the human race will survive once again? Then let's do it!
Starbuck, here we come.
All right, boys and girls, engage the enemy. Let's show them what we're made out of.
It's what I've been waiting for. Come get me, you little tin heads.
Alright, listen up, Nuggets. Stay together and keep your throttles firewalled until you hit that deck. Now go.
What's she doing?
Starbuck's gonna take on all 8. Get herself killed.
Hey, hot dog, where are you going? Hot dog, what are you doing? Whoa! That one! Hot dog, get out of here! Hot dog, I thought I told you to get your ass home.
You said never to leave your leader.
And I also said never disobey an order.
I'm hit!
I got you, hot dog. We're gonna make it through this. Break right. Now, now, now!
She'll make it.
Let's just lost all 3 names.
It's alright, hot dog. You did good. You're gonna be okay, I promise you. At least one of us will. That about does it. I think there's only one left. He's right on my tail, but I got it covered, okay? Starbucks wireless and transponder just cut out.
Alert 1. We spotted hot dog. No ID or visual on Starbuck.
Oh, crap me.
Somewhere at some time in our galaxy, there evolved an intelligent race of serpents known as Cylons. First, they created machines of superintelligence, the Cylon Centurions. Then they created the ultimate in machinery and technology, a ruler known as as the imperious leader. But due to a slight error in their programming, the imperious leader turned against his creators and ordered his subjects to exterminate all human life forms. Thus began a war with the Cylon Centurions that embraced all of the human race in the star system.
More than 10,000 years of the Earth's geography was different than it is today. There were two continents, one located in the middle of the Pacific Ocean and in the legends is known as Land of Mu or Lemuria, and the other located in the Atlantic Ocean in the northern hemisphere, corresponding to the legendary Atlantis. In each of these two continents inhabited by a race of men with a civilization far more advanced than our current civilization, and its power covered the entire planet. Those two races were rivals in a power struggle that led to Star in a terrible war, with powerful aircraft and nuclear weapons, which brought a fatal result was the collapse of these two territories under the waters of the ocean, as well emergence of other submerged land masses, before causing a modification of the morphology on the coasts of continents and global climate change alteration product of Earth's magnetic axis. The day of disaster is described in the Chronicle of a Quaker Carl Brugger. The twilight covered the surface of the earth. The sun shone still more gray haze, big and powerful, began to darken the light of day. Strange signs were displayed in the sky. A red sun and black trail crossed each other. Black, red, all four corners of the earth were red. The two races of gods began to dispute. They burned the world with solar heat, and tried to snatch the power to each other. The river course was altered, and the height of the mountains and the strength of the sun changed. There were inundated continents. Besides the destruction of Atlantis and Lemuria, desolation came to the civilizations of the planets Mars and Venus. Easter Island and its surroundings is a vestige of the land of Mu or Lemuria. Lemuria or Mulan, the kernel in 1868 Englishman James Churchward discovered in a temple school in India with ancient inscriptions splints in low relief. He became assistant to the high priest, in order to review the secret archives of the temple, where they hid the clay tablets, written by Nikhil's brother Santos, disappeared on Mother Earth called Mu. Tablets had the genesis of the world and the story of the sinking of Mu, 12,000 years before our era. His name was Mu, the Wihir people, and its capital was located in Asia. His heyday would have been 75,000 years ago, but the rule would soar to 150,000 years and more. The kernel never provided evidence of the existence of these tablets Hindustani. Another researcher, Professor Kozlov, under the ruins of Kurahata in the Gobi Desert found a sarcophagus that had the emblems of Mu, an M, tall and vertically crossed circle diameter. The writer J.J. Benitez in his book The Visitors tells the story of scientist Daniel W. Fry, who was abducted by an alien spacecraft on July 4, 1959. When the scientist was on board, tried to memorize every detail of the interior of the ship, and was struck by an emblem engraved on the back of the seat with a simplistic representation of a tree and a snake. Beings telepathically communicated to him and said the following: "Our ancestors lived on Earth, as we have imagined to see the emblem, were well advanced and lived on the site, that the legends of the land called Lemuria or Mu. Moreover, the scientific development of the continent of Atlantis also was very advanced, to the point that its scientists learned to handle atomic energy more skill than you currently have. There was some rivalry between the two nations and disaster was inevitable." In this connection himself, the great scientist Albert Einstein, shortly before his death, he had a conversation with a friend. Einstein, flying saucers exist, and people who possesses a human village parties Earth 20,000 years ago. Your friend, why do they come here? Einstein, they like to return to Earth, to be aware of the history of men. It is a return to the sources. Atlantis. Information on the Atlantean civilization was first awarded by Plato, and all other information comes from Edgar Cayce, holistic healer and psychic, and sources of information channeled, as is the case Cassiopean. Atlantis civilization or Atlantean existed for a long time and quite spread around the globe, not necessarily confined to the semi-legendary continent of Atlantis. Apparently, interplanetary travel was so easy for Atlantises, as it is for us to make a trip to the store. They had bases on the Moon, bases on Mars. The monuments of the Moon and Mars are of Atlantis. There were also some of the giant crystals, and these were used to collect cosmic and solar energy as a power source. The world's population was over 6 billion, and after the destruction survived 19 million.
The use of numbers in the Bible is very important. This film takes a close look at obvious uses of 5 very important number patterns used throughout the Word of God. These patterns involve the numbers 1, 3, 7, 10, and 13. It's no secret that our world, the universe, and life itself is made up of complex mathematics, from DNA to planetary orbital patterns, and from quantum particle dynamics to chemical compounds of living and non-living matter. Numbers are important. The Word of God has some amazing number patterns. Their interconnections are astounding. We begin with the number 1. We know that God declares that He is one. It is interesting to note, however, that in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4, where God says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one," that the word usage is very important. The word Lord is in the Hebrew Yahweh. It means the Creator God, or the great I am, the ultimate reality, God Himself. The Lord your God. The word God in Hebrew is Elohim. It actually is the plural of El, which means gods. The Lord your gods is but one, is how it would literally read, is but one. Hear, O Israel, the great I am, who exists in the plural, is but one. The word one in Hebrew is Echad. The Theological Word Book of the Old Testament has the following information on the word Echad. This word occurs 960 times. It is closely identified with Yahad, which means to be united. It stresses unity while recognizing diversity within that oneness. Likewise, it is used in Exodus chapter 24, verse 3, where the people are said to have spoken with one voice. In other words, a multiplicity of people, yet their voice is one. This expresses the Hebrew word Akkad. So in this oneness, God declares that He is God, Elohim, in the plural, but that He is one, Echad. He stresses His unity while recognizing a holy diversity within His oneness. The number 3, of course, is significant because it seems that this is the number that God uses to represent His oneness or completeness of holiness. Abraham receives a visit from Yahweh in Genesis chapter 18. The Bible tells us that the Lord came as 3 men. Abraham takes his son Isaac in the same book of Genesis to the region of Moriah where God has told him to sacrifice him. The journey is 3 days. And it is on the 3rd day that Abraham's son is given back to him alive, a picture of the resurrection of Jesus. Similarly, in the book of Jonah, the Bible tells us that he was in the belly of the whale for 3 days and 3 nights. Again, Jesus would use this as an example of his resurrection. Moses and the children of Israel were in the wilderness after they had left Egypt. The Bible tells us that it was in the 3rd month that they arrived at the foot of the Mount Sinai. And it was on the 3rd day of the 3rd month that God Himself came down and spoke the 10 Commandments in the hearing of all of the people. The Bible further declares that the Ark of the Covenant and the Holy of Holies contained 3 sacred objects: the tablets of stone, a jar of manna, and Aaron's staff. Of the 7 feasts of Israel mentioned in the book of Leviticus, the Israelite men were required to appear before the Lord 3 times out of those 7 feasts, at the Feast of Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles. The Bible tells us that Daniel regularly prayed 3 times a day, giving thanks to God. In Isaiah chapter 6, we hear the threefold declaration of worship and praise, with the angels surrounding the throne of God as they declare, "Holy, holy, holy." And of course, the Bible tells us that it was on the 3rd day that Jesus rose from the tomb. In the book of Revelation, the main theme of the whole book revolves around 3 groups of 7. The 7 seals, the 7 trumpets, and the 7 bowls of wrath. These groups of 7 are expressed as 3. Which brings us now to the number 7. 7 indicates a completeness, a wholeness, or a perfection. The biblical number 7 is probably the most well-known. The very first word of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In the original Hebrew consists of precisely 7 Hebrew words. The declaration of God's perfect creation is done with 7 Hebrew words in the very opening words, the very first verse of the Bible. Continuing in Genesis with the 7-day week established with the 7th being a holy day of rest, as well as understanding that the number 7 is used over 700 times in the Bible. As the Bible closes with the book of Revelation, it is a book of 7s, in that it is addressed to the 7 churches of Asia Minor in the form of 7 letters. As just noted, the main theme of Revelation is divided into 3 groups of 7, the 7 seals, the 7 trumpets, and the 7 bowls. These 3 sevens make up the bulk of the Revelation prophecy. The number 7 is used over 50 times in Revelation alone. The number 7 is an amazing number in life itself. Our world is filled with 7s. Here are 7 of them. There are 7 continents. There are 7 major oceanic bodies recognized by experts. There are 7 colors in a rainbow, 7 notes on a musical scale, 7 days in a week. There are 7 levels of the periodic table of elements, the stuff of all that is. There are 7 heavenly bodies that can be seen with the naked eye in our solar system. Our bodies are arranged in an amazing array of 7s just as well. Just to name a few of the many examples, 7 is the number of external cavities in the human head: 2 eyes, 2 nostrils, 1 mouth, 2 ears. The brain has 7 major identified cell assemblies, each with its own principle of operation. The human neck, which supports the head and the brain, has 7 vertebrae. The human central nervous system has 7 major components, the 6 regions of the brain plus the spinal cord. There are 7 medically recognized regions of the body. The human body has 7 recognized bodily functions. The 7 most critical organs are all housed within the torso. And on the number 7 goes, the number of God's perfection and completeness. The number 10 is equally amazing. Its significance is not as well known as the numbers 1, 3, and 7 among Bible students, but it is a significant number indeed. It is no accident that mankind counts and qualifies things by 10, and that the number 10 by far is the most common system of denoting numbers in both spoken and written languages worldwide. It probably originated with man's first counting system of using his fingers and toes, arranged neatly in groups of 10. 10 is the sum of the first 3 prime numbers, 2, 3, and 5. 10 has only 3 divisors, 1, 2, and 5. 10 is known as a triangular number because it is the sum of 3 natural numbers in a row. 10 is known as a centered triangular number as well. 10 is the 3rd centered triangular number. 10 and 3 then are intimately connected. And so it's no accident that in the opening pages of the Bible, there are 3 groups of 10 in the first 2 books of the Bible that speak the entire Bible story. The 10 utterances of creation speak of God's perfection created. The 10 plagues on Egypt speak of God's judgment on sin, and the 10 commandments given at Sinai speak of God's covenant of restoration. The whole message of the Bible spoken in the first 3 groups of 10: God's perfection created, God's judgment on sin, and God's covenant of restoration. The last use of the number 10 is in the book of Revelation, where the number 10 is used 10 times. And finally, the number 13. The number 13 is thought to be an unlucky number. This belief has unknown origins and involves several plausible possibilities. There are no written records of its origins before the 19th century. Some say its phobia in the ancient Christian world began with the teaching that there were 13 people at the Last Supper of Jesus, one of which was responsible for his death. The Roman Catholic Church, in its mistaken interpretation of Scripture, placed that death on a Friday, thus the unlucky Friday the 13th. But in actuality, the number 13 is an important biblical number. When the nation of Israel was first established after its wilderness wanderings, it settled the new land with 12 tribes, plus the Levites, who were to be the priests over all the land. Thus, a total of 13 tribes constituted Israel. When Jesus began his ministry, he picked 12 disciples. He was the priest over all of them. Thus, the church was born with 13 men. In 1948, Israel was reborn. From that time to now, its greatest friend and protector, the one nation that has ensured the existence of Israel, has been the United States of America. The United States of America began its existence as a nation with 13 colonies.
The Sumerian and the Babylonian Akkadian texts were altered many times in the ancient past, as we discussed in previous papers, and so were the Vedas, until the alien invaders felt more at ease with what they released to the public. Some people think that the oldest Sumerian or Vedic records, for example, which they have found deeply buried and perhaps untouched for thousands of years, must be legitimate, telling the true story. What people are not thinking about, though, is that the records were manipulated in the first place in many cases, so it doesn't matter how old they are. The deity of Aldebaran is Brahma, who since the invasion of Earth is also known as Lord Vishnu, Lord Enki. The way I see it is that after Lucifer's rebellion and Lucifer being cast out of heaven, he took his resort to Aldebaran and the Pleiades, a sanctuary he soon also came to share with his future consort, Queen Ereshkigal. The Taurus/Bull constellation is depicted in the night sky as facing Orion in combat, which is Lucifer's future goal. The invasion will come from the Pleiades as well as the invasion came from the Pleiades. Having listened to the Pleiadian lectures over the years is paying off. There are things I wouldn't have been able to put together if I hadn't listened to them and read Barbara Marciniak's channeled books. In a lecture that now is a few years old, the Pleiadians said that their ancestors were the branch of the fallen angels that descended to Mount Hermon, led by the dark angel, Azazel. They were the giants who came and raped human women and created giant offspring, the Nephilim. What the Pleiadians never said is that these giants from the Pleiades were no different from the original invaders team. The invasion came from the Pleiades because that's where Lucifer resided at the time when he decided to invade Earth. Azazel and his team are in no shape and form differentiated from the rest of the alien force. It's just that at one point in time, some of the alien minions decided, or were ordered to, create a new life form on Earth, the giants. It was an experiment like everything else. As a side note, they also got the pleasure of seducing human females, whom they found irresistibly attractive. Hypothetically, these beings could, in their interdimensional form, have sex with human females, especially in dream state, but that's not what they wanted. They wanted to experience sex the way humans experienced sex. How did they do that? By taking on human male bodies, of course. That's how they did it, and that didn't create any giant Nephilim. How could it? No, the Nephilim were created in laboratories, possibly on Mars. Still, the issue is, the alien invasion, which forced the Orion settlers here on Earth to retreat back to Orion, came from the Pleiades. Now, if we look at the constellations again, with Taurus facing Orion, this has two significances. First, it symbolizes this ancient battle between the Pleiades and Orion here in our solar system, but it also symbolizes a future threat from the Pleiades, saying, the day will come when we will invade Orion and take over Satania, Orion's inner sanctuary, and the sky will show everybody that we mean business. The bull has already horned Orion once in the War of the Titans, and in the night sky, we see him on his way to horn him again. Another interesting thing here is something else I learned from the Pleiadians. I have brought it up before, but not in this exact context. The Pleiadians say that we humans will have a great part in the future war between the Pleiades and Orion. As I mentioned earlier in this paper, the entire Pleiades, or Taurus constellation, is not yet under Lucifer's control. In the future, however, it seems as if Lucifer wants the entire constellation to be his to rule, possibly because it will be a strong and strategic military unification in a future war. Here on Earth, we have already started planning for all this with our research in artificial intelligence, AI, super soldiers, cyborgs, cloning, and singularity, etc. On the timeline where this will be brought to fruition, humanity as a social memory complex, SMC, will be the foot soldiers who attack the Pleiades that are not yet under Lucifer's control. This independent part of the Pleiades will fight back, and a terrific civil war will break out in the Pleiades. The future humans, a faction of which we call the Grey Aliens, will fight ferociously and without fear because our emotions will be controlled by proxy, possibly from a location on Saturn. According to the Pleiadians themselves, this is what is happening in the Pleiades as they speak. They try to convince us that Enki is amongst the rebel group who wants independence in the Pleiades, and he wants mankind to evolve naturally, without technology, while Enlil is the bad guy, who has instigated the process leading to the civil war in the Pleiades. The Pleiadians are thereby saying that they are working with Enki to help us humans here in our time, the 21st century, to choose a more peaceful timeline without AI, cloning, and all the rest of it. That way, hopefully, the violent timeline that led to the war in the Pleiades will be erased and at the same time save the beings in the Pleiades from our ferocious selves, armed to our teeth with Enlil's deadly weapons. Not even with the most objectivity one can imagine would the above agenda make sense. The evidence against it is, as they say, overwhelming. However, the reader can clearly see how we are being deceived from many different angles at once, and it's certainly a great task to keep our minds straight in all this. The bottom line is, however, that the alien invader force, once again from the constellation of Taurus, want to attack Orion, but this time with a much greater force, where we humans are a part of the agenda. It's evident that Lucifer Enki at one point retreated to the Pleiades, and better yet, Aldebaran. With this in mind, suddenly evidence in other aspects of the larger scheme of things start emerging. One example is the consistent myth that Enlil was Jehovah. This can now be totally debunked by just picking evidence left and right. I picked the following because it comes from a neutral source, without any agenda in the Jehovah case. Quote 3.
The bull has been associated with the animal that Adam first offered in sacrifice, or with the later victims in the Jewish temple, in the Christian school of which Novidius was spokesman, recognized in Taurus the ox that stood with the ass by the manger at the Blessed Nativity.
The bull goes way back in mythology and tradition, obviously, and was the first animal Adam supposedly offered to God. Why a bull? Because it was the animal most closely connected with God, known as Lucifer. As we can see, Aldebaran and the whole Taurus constellation, plus the Pleiades in specific, have a very important part in the past, present, and future of our sector of the galaxy, including our own solar system to a large degree. However, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There is more, a lot more. The Pleiades have a great deal of importance in today's New Age movement, as I think most of us have seen. However, in that sense, this asterism has taken on a relatively benevolent role. Not so much so by the New Agers themselves, but through manipulation that has hit the target from many different angles. Many say that the New Age movement actually started with Madame Helena Blavatsky and her channeling of the Ascended Masters, which with time developed into the so-called Ashtar Command. Out of Blavatsky's teachings came the Theosophical Society, a highly Luciferian movement. We are going to discuss this movement quite extensively in this paper because it's highly relevant in today's politics. Ashtar is said to originate in Sirius, but it also has tentacles that are reaching out toward Arcturus and the Pleiades, and they are usually portraying themselves as the attractive tall and blonde Nordics. We discussed the Ashtar Command to some extent in the third level of learning. Blavatsky and her successors, Alice Bailey and Anne Besant, also wrote and talked about the Egyptian goddess, Isis. Blavatsky even wrote a book called Isis Revealed. We don't need to look very far before we can see that there is a connection between Ashtar, Isis, Sirius, and the Pleiades. In previous papers, I have emphasized the importance of sound in this third dimension. How words are pronounced and the similarity between many of them when they are spoken can be of great importance. Ian is deeply embedded into our DNA. In what we just discussed, we have a few different names that are connected by the sound of them: Ashtar, Ishtar, Astarte, Atar, Astar, and Ast. Now, let us distinguish and then connect. Astarte is simply the Greek name of the Babylonian goddess Ishtar, and so is Atar and Ashtar. The word As means female of throne, or queen of the throne, and refers to Isis, who is the heiress of the throne of the Orion Empire. Thus, we can see that all these names and words are associated with the same being, Ishtar Isis. The Ashtar command can now easily, by sound, be interchangeable with the Ishtar command, and we can get a good hint where this channeling comes from. If the Ashtar Command is telling us that they come as our saviors, or are our beneficiaries, and we feel we can relate to that, we are indeed deceiving ourselves and are in deep trouble, obviously so, from what we have learned in the Westpenner papers. The Ashtar Command goes back to a channeler called George Van Tassel, who claimed to be channeling this group of beings in the early 1950s. Since then, many channelers claim to have had contact with this galactic group of ETs or spiritual entities. They have often predicted end-of-the-world scenarios with themselves being the saviors of mankind. The origin of these beings differs depending on whom you are talking to. But there are many who say they have been told by the Ashtar Command that they reside in one of the Pleiadian star systems. Although Marciniak's Pleiadians do not want to discuss the Ashtar Command and don't believe in saviors whatsoever, these beings are still promoting themselves as benevolent toward mankind and are said to be working with Enki. Thereby, we can sense a good cop, bad cop situation here, confusing the masses and putting the ETs in two camps, good and bad Pleiadians. Psychological warfare like this is a must in mind control, and it's not absent here, either. Here we have the mission of the Ashtar Command, also called the Galactic Federation of Light. Quote number 4.
The Ashtar Command is the airborne division of the Great Brother/Sisterhood of Light, under the administrative direction of Commander Ashtar and the spiritual guidance of Lord Sananda, our Commander-in-Chief, known to Earth as Jesus the Christ. Composed of millions of starships and personnel from many civilizations, we are here to assist Earth and humanity through the current cycle of planetary cleansing and polar realignment. We serve like midwives in the birthing of humanity from dense physical to physical etheric bodies of light, capable of ascending into the fifth dimension along with the Earth. We of the Brotherhood of Light, and we who serve in the intergalactic fleets and cosmic federation councils, come forth to bring you knowledge for a most eventful and confusing transition.
The readers probably have noticed that what we're now discussing is to some degree a recap of the third level of learning, but it's very important and worth repeating. Repetition is also something that is bound to happen when the things we are discussing are beginning to come full circle. Marciniak's Pleiadians, from now on called the MP, boldly state that the Galactic Federation of Light is disinformation, but does this mean that the Ashtar Command and the Federation don't exist? Not necessarily. They exist but are not what they say that they are. Ashtar and Ishtar are two names that are too similar to be ignored. The invaders work extensively with sound. This means that Ereshkigal, herself a Pleiadian resident who took over Ishtar's/Inanna's and Isis's role, is most probably in charge of the Galactic Federation of Light and the Ashtar Command. To add to the confusion, we have the MP who reject the Ashtar Command and any Galactic Federation, but when we study Ashtar, these websites often promote the MP, so it's making it very confusing and putting people in different camps, which is also the intention. It's actually brilliant because as long as people are in different camps, nothing earth-shaking will happen, and time is just running. 10 years later, such movements haven't moved an inch. It's all by design.
There are those who believe that life here began out there, far across the universe, with tribes of humans who may have been the forefathers of the Egyptians, or the Toltecs, or the Mayans, that they may have been the architects of the Great Pyramids, or the lost civilizations of Lemuria, or Atlantis. Some believe that there may yet be brothers of man who even now fight to survive, far, far away amongst the stars.
delegates, I realize you're all anxious to get back to your ships before our rendezvous with the Cylons. But I think it appropriate to toast the most significant event in the history of mankind. I would like to raise my chalice to you. Not merely as the quorum of 12, representing the 12 colonies of man, but as my friends, the greatest leaders ever assembled. As we approach the 7th millennium of time, the human race at last will find peace. Thanks to you. Peace.
The association the Australian Aborigines drew between the Pleiades and a bird is widespread. Many other peoples associate the Pleiades with birds. For example, Athenius, Hesiod, Pindar, Simonides, and Sicily call them the 7 doves. In the Bible, doves are associated with spirits. The ancients associate Taurus with the Noahic flood, and Pleiades with the Ark, again tying the constellation to the dove, and indirectly to the heavenly Jerusalem. In the Coverdale Bible of 1535, the margin note to the reference in Job reads, "These 7 stars, the clock hen with her chicks," reflecting the then common name for the Pleiades among the North Central and Western Europeans, namely hen and chickens, a reference to Jerusalem. This is said to have come from Razel, and other Hebrew writers, who remarked on the similarity between the Greek word for Pleiades, and the Greek word for chicken coop. The Japanese also saw the Pleiades as a hen and her chicks. The Samoans know the Pleiades as the bird of paradise, the first hint of a link between the Pleiades and paradise. The Pleiades are associated with the Feast of the Dead on November 1st, as celebrated by the Roman Catholic Church in Europe, the Celtic Druids, and the natives of Peru. In Australia, the event sparked a 3-day celebration in honor of the Pleiades. When we look at the lore associated, worldwide with the Pleiades, we find there threads of all the elements connected with the Church in the Holy Bible. There can be little doubt that the original pattern, perhaps dating back to Adam, who was the first astronomer among Jewish and early Christian writers, is at least in part preserved in the world's myths and tales of the Pleiades. We find then, in the Pleiades, a strong type of the Church of God. Revelation 1:20 says, "The mystery of the 7 stars which thou sawest in my right hand, and the 7 golden candlesticks. The 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches, and the 7 candlesticks which thou sawest are the 7 churches." Today we call ourselves by the Greek word Christian, but have we ever questioned where the term originated? And what does it mean? The New Schaff-Herzog Encyclopedia of Religious Knowledge confirms that the name originated outside of Christian and Jewish circles. From my studies of theology, I have learned that the figure known as Jesus was created by the Council of Nicaea in the year 325 AD, as a way to bring together all of the Yeshua cults via Emperor Constantine. The council added the supranational abilities of Mithra, Horus, and Osiris to the Jesus entity they created, and from that point forward, Christianity was created. The Bible has missing chapters such as the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, the Book of Numbers and the Book of the Wars of Jehovah, so one must question why any books would be eliminated and why. What we know through these missing books. For example, when the Israelites idolized the golden calf when Moses went to the mountains, it symbolized the age of Taurus. When Moses blew on the ram's horn, it symbolized the age of Aries. When Jesus fed the masses with 2 fish, it symbolized the age of Pisces. When Jesus said to follow the man bearing the pitcher of water, it symbolized the age of Aquarius. The King James Version of the Bible wasn't written until the year 1611, and was edited by Rosicrucian and Freemason, Sir Francis Bacon. With ties to secret societies, is it possible that the truth was twisted and/or encrypted? What we do know is that there is a Christian Bible on the main floor of any Freemason lodge. The story of Jesus was created by the Church as a means of subservience, control, and conformity to religion and government. While it's definitely possible that an entity with supranational abilities existed, he was most likely an extraterrestrial or possibly an Anunnaki hybrid. The name Christian was a term employed to describe one who was an initiate, and understood the inner meaning of the Greek and Roman mystery religions. Thus, the early followers of Jesus refused to be called Christian. We find no less than 12 mythical historical personages before the advent of Christ, who are said to have suffered crucifixion, death and to have risen from the dead. Among them are, Krishna, Vithoba, Osiris, Attis, Indra, Prometheus, Mithra, Dionysius, Croesus, Aesculapius, Adonis, Apollonius of Tyana. Several of these figures are said to have been crucified at the spring equinox, and to have risen on the 3rd day. The date of Christmas was purposely fixed on December 25th, to push into the background the great festival of the sun god, and Epiphany on January 6th to supplant an Egyptian festival of the same day. The Easter ceremonies rivaled the pagan spring festivals. The religious art of the Christians continued the pagan art of the preceding generations. The Christian representations of the Madonna and Child are clearly the continuation of the representations of Isis and her son suckling her breast. The first Jewish menorah was the one with 7 branches that was lit by priests at the Holy Temple during biblical times in Jerusalem. It is the symbol of the Jewish people and the state of Israel. The 9-branch menorah, called in Hebrew Chanukah, is used only during the holiday of Hanukkah. The Talmud states that it is forbidden to use a 7-branched menorah outside of the temple, which is why the modern-day Chanukah is slightly different. The tabernacle, according to the Hebrew Bible, was the portable dwelling place for the divine presence from the time of the Exodus from Egypt, through the conquering of the land of Canaan. The anointing oil for the tabernacle and the incense for the altar of incense, made from God's own prescribed formulas of spices, were both declared holy by God, and could only be used for the purpose of the tabernacle. Anyone else using the same formula for their own consumption would be cut off from Israel. Exodus 30. This oil used may have been a type of rocket fuel. Also, the special garments for the priests were holy. If they did not wear the right clothing in serving the Lord, they could die. Exodus 28. Sounds like radiation suits are needed. God told Moses to create the tabernacle exactly the way he commanded. It was not to stray from God's blueprint. God had chosen the Israelites as his special people. For the Israelites to qualify for that distinction, God had demanded one thing. They must obey his law, the 10 Commandments.
Robert Bigelow, founder of the military contractor Bigelow Aerospace. The Las Vegas tycoon spoke with 60 Minutes in May.
Do you imagine that in our space travels we will encounter other forms of intelligent life?
You don't have to go anywhere.
You can find it here.
Yeah.
Where exactly?
It's just like right under people's noses. Oh my gosh. Wow.
Robert Bigelow, founder of the military contractor Bigelow Aerospace. The Las Vegas tycoon spoke with 60 Minutes in May.
Do you imagine that in our space travels we will encounter other forms of intelligent life?
You don't have to go anywhere.
You can find it here.
Yeah.
Where exactly?
It's just like right under people's noses. Oh my gosh. Wow.